This is a history that takes us to Rome in the year 847. The earth cracks beneath St. Cecilia's basilica. Something ancient stirs, not a creature but a language. It seeps into prayers, reshapes scripture, and speaks through the faithful. As reality bends and memory becomes sacred text, one bishop must decide whether to silence the voice beneath the city, or let the world be rewritten. Dust upon the altar, Rome, 847 AD. The city trembled in the grip of an unseen wrath. It began with a whisper beneath the cobbled streets, a low groan of earth that rose into a monstrous roar. The mosaics on the ceilings of the Church of St. Cecilia cracked like dry bones. Marble saints lost their fingers, their gazes frozen in divine sorrow. When the shaking ended, a veil of dust cloaked the basilica like funeral ash. Bishop San Saba stood before the fractured altar, a golden censer still swinging in his hand. Smoke curled from it, sluggish and gray, the incense heavy with myrrh. He did not speak. He could not. Something deep beneath his ribs, older than fear, clawed at his breath. Outside, cries echoed from Trastevere's narrow streets. Children wailed, and dogs barked at nothing. Somewhere a bell tolled on its own. "The Lord tests us," murmured Brother Marius, emerging from the shadows, his robe torn and eyes wide. But why so cruelly? San Saba turned slowly. The tremor had fractured more than stone. It had cracked the silence that had shrouded his soul for decades. For in that moment, as the altar crumbled, he had heard a sound no man should hear, whispers from the crypt beneath the church, in Latin and older tongues. "Did you hear them?" the bishop asked. Brother Marius flinched. "Hear what, your grace?" But San Saba already knew. The other man had heard only thunder, yet San Saba had heard voices, calling him by name. That night, sleep came fitfully, and with it, dreams. He wandered a Rome not of this world, the Forum reassembled in ghostly grandeur, the Pantheon weeping blood from its oculus, and crows, dozens, hundreds, circling above St. Peter's like a living crown of thorns. One landed on his shoulder. It stared at him with a human eye. "Beneath the stone it wakes," the crow said, and then pecked into his ear until the dream dissolved in agony. San Saba woke before dawn. The candle in his chamber had burned low, wax spilling like pale entrails across the desk. He walked barefoot through the basilica, now cordoned off with ropes and guarded by uneasy monks. None dared stop him. He descended past the nave, down the tight spiral of the old steps that led into the crypt. The air grew colder, wetter, and heavier. The crypt was older than the basilica itself, a holdover from some forgotten pagan shrine. Few dared enter. Even fewer returned with peace. At its heart stood a sarcophagus, cracked lengthwise. A raven feather rested atop it, though no birds had been seen below for centuries. He touched the feather. It turned to ash. A whisper stirred again, not in the air but in his skull. Beneath the stone it wakes. He stumbled back, heart pounding. Footsteps, real ones. "Your Grace?" came a soft voice. It was Brother Marius again, holding a candle. But his face looked wrong. Not unfamiliar, just wrong. Too still, too pale, like a mask of wax. "I heard a voice," San Saba said. "As did I," Marius replied. "But I do not think it was God." Then the candle flickered and went out, and in the darkness, something began to breathe. The next morning, San Saba gathered the brothers in the chapter room. Sunlight streamed through the arched windows, painting golden patterns over the worn floor. Yet the air inside remained heavy, as though the tremor had pressed an invisible weight upon their shoulders. "Brothers," he began, his voice softer than usual, "we must examine the damage below. The crypt may hold structural weaknesses. We cannot allow the basilica to collapse." The monks exchanged nervous glances. A few nodded hesitantly. Most looked away. Only one stepped forward, Brother Emilio, a novitiate not yet 20, with bright eyes that held more courage than wisdom. "I will go with you, your grace," he said. San Saba placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "You are brave, but you do not yet understand what sleeps beneath stone." Emilio didn't flinch. "That is why I must go, so I may learn." That evening they descended together. The bishop brought a lantern filled with blessed oil, while Emilio carried rope and chalk. The steps creaked, as if the very basilica resented their return. In the crypt, silence reigned once more. No voices, no breath. Only cold. They moved deeper into a chamber San Saba had long avoided, an annex sealed since the time of his predecessor. Dust choked the air. Carved reliefs lined the walls, their figures worn, yet unmistakably pagan. Serpents devouring their tails, horned gods holding vessels of fire, and symbols scratched away by early Christian zeal. At the far wall stood a stone door, marked with the Giro. Yet beneath that sacred sign, barely visible, was something older, a spiral burned into the stone, like a scar that refused to fade. This was not made by our order, San Saba murmured. He pressed his palm to the spiral. The stone was warm. The lantern's flame dimmed. Behind them, the sarcophagus groaned. They turned. The crack in its lid had widened. Emilio stepped back, breath sharp. What is in there? I do not know, the bishop said, but I fear it has waited a very long time to be found. He approached the tomb slowly, prayer rising from his lips. Domine, libera nos a tenebris. The whisper came again, this time clear and close. You should not have returned. The bishop's knees buckled. Emilio caught him. They fled, the light failing behind them, the darkness closing like a mouth. Later, alone in his study, San Saba pored over old texts, scrolls hidden in the basilica's oldest cupboards, their Latin brittle with age. He found references to the cultus umbrae, the cult of shadow, excommunicated by the first bishops of Rome. They worshipped something ancient predating Christ, something said to dwell in caverns below the 7 hills. One line, written in a dying hand, froze his blood. To wake it is to end the church. His hands trembled. Then from beyond the walls, he heard the bell toll. But no one had pulled its rope, and outside, beneath the moon, the crows had returned. The scroll from below San Saba did not eat the next morning. He sat at his desk, robes unfastened, gaze fixed on the darkened edges of a parchment that bore no seal and no date. It had not been among the scrolls in the study the night before. It had appeared, unbidden, on his desk. The script was angular and dense, resembling Latin only in the way a shadow resembles a man. The ink shimmered faintly when tilted, as if something moved beneath the surface. He called Emilio to him. You must take this to the abbey in Farfa, he said, voice gravel. Ask the librarian if he has seen such a script, and tell no one else of it. But, your grace, no questions. Emilio bowed, but he did not hide his unease. As he turned to go, a single wax droplet from the candle on the bishop's desk hissed as it struck the parchment. The ink did not smudge, it darkened. By midday the young monk was gone, riding through the sunlit countryside toward the north. San Saba remained behind, pacing the cloisters with restless fervor. He paused by a fig tree that had stood undisturbed for generations. It was bare now, leaves withered as if struck by frost, though the sun shone brightly above. There was something familiar in the script, something his mind recoiled from each time it tried to comprehend it. Not a memory, a warning. He returned to the crypt before vespers, alone. The spiral on the stone door was glowing faintly. This time he brought holy water and chalk. He traced the spiral, poured the water, and whispered every prayer he knew. Psalms from childhood, secret devotions, words not heard since Antioch. The glow dimmed, but then he heard the sound of breathing again. Not near the sarcophagus, behind the door. This time the breathing spoke. Sanctus, Saba. He fled, again. That night, he found Marius in the library. The elder monk sat before a scattered array of scrolls, all marked with the sigils of ancient heresies. His hands trembled, parchment clutched like a lifeline. I was wrong, Marius said. This is not a test, it is a reckoning. What have you read? Marius met his eyes. That there were once 13 bishops of Rome before Peter. That the crypt we guard was once a gate, and that it cannot remain sealed forever. You believe these lies? I believe the stone glows. I believe the tomb breathes. And I believe something beneath us waits to rise. San Saba clenched his fists. Then we must stop it. Marius laughed, dry, bitter. We are not the first to try. The cult was buried, but it was never broken. They called themselves Custodes Umbrae, the keepers of the shadow. We call them madmen. They called us thieves. Thieves? They say we stole the world from its first gods. We built our church atop the ashes of their temple, and now they want it back. In the days that followed, strange things began to happen. The wine turned to brackish water in its casks. Candles flickered and hissed, refusing to hold flame for long. One monk, silent brother Hilarius, went blind overnight. Another vanished during morning prayer, his robes found folded at the foot of the altar. Sister Leonora, who tended the infirmary, saw black moths crawling from the mouths of the ill. They left no corpses behind, only a fine gray powder. At night the birds did not sing, and by morning more of the garden had withered. Emilio returned on the 7th day. His face was pale, his eyes darker. The librarian said he's seen it once, he whispered to San Saba, in a text kept locked beneath the abbey's floor. It is not Latin. It is script. They say it predates Babel. Did he say who wrote it? He said it was not written by a man. San Saba took the scroll and locked it away. Then, unable to resist, he unlocked it again. He read. The script crawled before his eyes. Letters reshaped themselves. He saw a tower of tongues, a star falling into a sea of bones, a hand reaching up from the soil of Rome. Each word tasted like ash. He dreamed that night of fire under the hills, of a crown made not of gold, but bone, of the 7 hills cracking like eggshells, something inside pushing to be born. He woke with blood on his pillow, and the church bell tolled again. No wind moved, no hand touched it. Only the dead listened, and they began to whisper back. The bishop below 3 nights after reading the scroll, San Saba no longer slept. He sat by candlelight in the nave, eyes bloodshot, lips cracked from whispered prayer. Around him the cathedral was hollow, emptied of certainty, echoing only with dread. Marble saints loomed, their carved faces softened by age and shadow, their hands frozen in gestures of grace that no longer comforted him. The whispers had spread, not merely beneath the crypt, but through the walls, in the vestry, in the refectory, muffled voices always at the edge of hearing, names spoken in reverse, a chant that rose, fell, and never ended. On the 4th morning, a peasant girl was found outside the cathedral gate. She was barefoot, her dress torn, her skin cold to the touch though the sun had already risen. She clutched a small bundle, a black feather, a tooth wrapped in cloth, and a coin etched with a symbol neither Roman nor Christian. She had no tongue. She had torn it out herself. She lived just long enough to scrawl a single word in blood on the steps. Regretted. It returns. San Saba ordered her buried in sanctified ground. The earth refused her. 3 times they dug. 3 times the grave filled itself in. She was burned. Later that week, Marius vanished. There were no signs of struggle. His robes remained neatly folded atop his cot. His candle had burned all the way down. On the wall above his sleeping space, etched with the edge of a knife, were 3 concentric spirals. Beneath them, a line in the Ur script. San Saba no longer needed translation. He has gone beneath. The bishop convened the remaining clergy. Fewer than a dozen, the others had fled or fallen ill. Leonora limped with a new wound that would not close. Emilio no longer spoke without prompting. There is rot within this city, San Saba said. Not metaphorical, not moral, real, old. We must seal the crypt entirely. They agreed, but with fear in their eyes. The fear of men who had seen sacred things defiled by truths older than Scripture. At midnight, they descended with mortar and stone. The spiral was inert now, but the air was wrong, thick with the scent of burned myrrh and wet clay. San Saba touched the door. It was warm. They worked quickly, walled it up stone by stone, sealed it. When the last stone was placed, the cathedral trembled, just once, like something beneath had shifted and rolled over in slumber. The whispers stopped. For 2 days, silence reigned. On the 3rd night, San Saba dreamed of a throne room buried deep below Rome. It was circular. Pillars rose from a floor of black salt. At the center, a figure sat draped in robes of ashen linen. Its face was a skull, but its eye sockets glowed. Around it knelt 12 others. Each wore a bishop's mitre. Each lacked a face. You locked the door, the voice said. It was the same voice that had breathed his name. But you left the house standing. San Saba awoke with his heart racing and blood dripping from his left ear. He rushed to the crypt. The wall still stood, but the spiral had reappeared. This time, it bled. The next morning, Pope Honorius arrived unannounced. He came not in splendor, but cloaked, his retinue minimal. His face was gaunt, eyes heavy. He spoke little and listened less. San Saba ushered him into the sacristy. You should not have come, the bishop said. The ground beneath the Lateran shakes at night, Honorius replied, and the crows scream like men. San Saba showed him the scroll. The Pope did not touch it. He merely looked and turned pale. I saw one like it once, he murmured. In Constantinople, it was burned. The monk who brought it died laughing. Then he met San Saba's gaze. What lies beneath your church is not a demon. It is not even a god. It is a memory of a world that ended once and wishes to be remembered. San Saba whispered, what do we do? Die faithful, the Pope said, and die slow. That is all the Lord allows now. That night the bells rang again, but this time every bell in Rome answered, and none had been touched. San Saba fell to his knees. In the distance, beneath the stones, something began to dig its way up. Not clawing, climbing. The black procession. It began with silence. No thunder, no trumpet, no lightning rending the sky. Just the sudden, inexplicable hush that rolled across Rome like fog. By dawn, no birds sang. The Tiber ran sluggish, its waters darkened with ash. Dogs whined and scratched at doors. Children refused to speak. Fires would not light, and bells hung mute despite the Pope's own hand. In the heart of the Lateran Basilica, Pope Honorius sat in vigil. Around him, scribes lay slumped in prayer, exhausted from transcribing warnings that had no end. Beneath his chair, the floor was cracked. Thin slits in the marble exhaled a slow heat, like breath from a deep wound. Honorius called San Saba to him. "It is spreading," the Pope said, "not just in stone, in men." He turned and gestured toward a heavy tapestry, one that bore the crucifixion. 2 guards lifted it aside. Behind it, a wall of flesh, faces, half-formed, silent, pressed against the stone. Their eyes blinked. One mouthed San Saba's name. "I dream of these things," the Pope said, "and I wake to find them real." The city held a procession that morning, not for saints, not for martyrs, for protection. Clergy, nobles, citizens, all marched behind San Saba and Honorius. Crosses were held high, but they did not shine. Incense thickened the air but did not sweeten it. They marched from the Lateran to San Clemente, then toward the ruins of the Forum, where once emperors had prayed to gods now silent. There, beneath the arch of Septimius Severus, the ground cracked open. From it rose the first of the Ashen. They did not scream, they did not run, they sang. Voices layered upon voices, echoing in dissonant harmony. The crowd fell to its knees, some wept, others tore their clothes. The Ashen were tall, human in silhouette but wrong in proportion. They wore no garments, but ash clung to them in the shape of ancient vestments. Their eyes were coal. Their hands were not hands at all, but tools. Knives, scrolls, brands, and at their center, walking slowly like a bishop leading a mass, came Marius. He bore no eyes now. His skin was a page, covered in text that crawled when he moved. He pointed at San Saba. "Custodes mentiti sunt," he said. "The guardians have lied." The crowd broke, not in panic, but in reverence. Some followed, others did not. Those who remained were taken by the Ashen, not killed, transformed, folded into the air like parchment burned to nothing. San Saba awoke days later beneath Castel Sant'Angelo. He had been rescued, dragged from the Forum by Emilio and Leonora, both of whom bore strange marks across their skin now, spirals that pulsed when they touched stone. They sheltered with the Fraticelli, heretical monks long driven underground, and yet it was they who now kept vigil over the last remnants of the Church's authority. "They move through the walls," one whispered. "They do not sleep," said another. "They remember." A Fraticello named Brother Tommaso gave San Saba a text, the Book of Returning. It had no author, only the sigil of a spiral and pages of prose that shifted as it was read. From it, San Saba learned the truth. The Ashen were not demons, they were survivors, priests of a forgotten order predating Rome. When the new church rose, their temple was buried beneath it, their gospel was silenced. But their right, the right of return, remained encoded in Rome's very stones. The spiral was a gate, and the bishops were its lock. San Saba was the last lock. That night Leonora screamed in her sleep. Emilio held her, but her mouth foamed with black fluid. Her veins pulsed with light. When she awoke, she did not speak. She wrote. 10 pages, none in any known tongue. On the last page, she drew a map, not of Rome, of what lay beneath it. They followed it, through the crypt of St. Cecilia, into the catacombs, past tombs so old their names had no vowels. They descended by torchlight deeper than maps allowed. They found the door, not a door of wood, nor of iron. It was light and shadow in the shape of an arch. Beyond it, soundless wind, a presence, a pressure in the skull. Emilio fell to his knees. Leonora bled from the eyes. San Saba stepped forward. He whispered a prayer, not from the Bible, from the scroll. The door opened. Inside, there was no time, only memory. He walked through a city of obsidian. Towers rose like bones from salt. Statues of men with wings of scripture stared down. And at the center, the throne, occupied. The figure rose. No eyes, no voice, only the sound of pages turning. "Bishop," it said, though the lips did not move. "You built your church from my ruin." San Saba knelt. "I would unbuild it. You would forget. I would remember first." The figure stepped down, touched his brow. Fire, salt, ash, scripture, blood, birth, death. San Saba screamed, and the spiral opened across his chest. He awoke in the chapel of the bones, alone. Above him, skulls stared in grim silence. Beneath him, soil from the catacombs. A single candle burned at the altar. He was changed. His skin bore markings like Leonora's now, symbols writ in moving ink. But more than that, he remembered. He remembered being Marius. He remembered the temple beneath. He remembered the betrayal and the promise. From the shadows, a voice spoke. "You carry it now," said Leonora, stepping into the candlelight. "The last key." Emilio followed her, arm wrapped in bandages, eyes wide with something like awe. "What must I do?" San Saba asked. "Return it," she said. "To the throne. And if I don't?" She said nothing, but from her robes she drew a scroll. It was made of skin, his own, and it was still warm. In the dark beneath the chapel of the bones, San Saba stood motionless, not from fear, but from memory. Every breath he took echoed with the weight of centuries. The damp, mineral-laced air clung to his skin like parchment left in crypts. Every pulse a chant, every blink a scripture. The markings on his skin moved, yes, but now they sang, quietly, to themselves, as if remembering the world before Rome was Rome, before names were carved into time. Leonora watched him with unease, her cloak soaked in the moist silence of the underworld. The candle she held spat and flickered, casting her face in shifting half-light. Emilio stood behind her, eyes wide, unmoving, his lips parted as if he had forgotten how to close them. In the orange halo of the flame, they looked like revenants risen from memory itself. "You are not the bishop anymore," Leonora said, her voice a brittle thread. "No," Saba murmured. "I am the key. Then we must find the lock." They emerged from the catacombs into a city that was no longer Rome. Not ruined, not burned. Changed. Ash had shaped itself into towering forms, monuments of uncanny geometry, their facades crawling with impossible frescoes that shimmered in and out of phase with reality. Towers of bone and glass pierced the skyline where once domes had ruled. Streets twisted into fractal spirals that defied Euclidean laws. The marble of the Forum roiled like stirred milk. Windows no longer obeyed time. One showed a battlefield where forgotten legions fought endlessly under black suns. Another revealed a city made entirely of salt, weeping tears that hissed as they struck the stone. The Ashen were everywhere, pale, blind-eyed figures in robes of stitched scripture. They walked without urgency, their fingers brushing buildings and people alike, leaving behind trails of ink that bled into the air. Some sang, low chants that cracked stone. Others stood and stared upward, mouths agape, as if listening to voices none but they could hear. And the people followed. Some knelt in silence, overcome. Others screamed and tore their garments, offering their blood in ecstatic sacrifice. A few burned themselves alive in the Forum, their flames forming sigils in the smoke. "Let us be parchment," they cried. "Let us be remembered." The Pope was gone. Only the Swiss guards remained at the Lateran gates. They barred entry, swords drawn, faces gaunt, until they saw San Saba. Then they fell, not with fear, but in reverence, as if before a god returned. They opened the gates. The basilica had been transformed beyond blasphemy. The walls pulsed faintly, etched with a script that rearranged itself when unobserved. The altar had become a tower of bone, coiling up like a spine into the dome above. Where the sky once gazed down in peaceful blue, now hovered a wound, a bleeding hole that wept symbols instead of stars. The crucifix hung inverted. The figure upon it, no longer Christ but something older, smiled. Cardinal Raspari emerged from shadow like smoke becoming flesh. He should have been dead. Saba remembered it clearly, the dagger, the gasp, the blood on stone. And yet here Raspari stood, alive, or something like it. "You brought it back," he said. "The memory, the covenant." "You tried to stop it," Saba replied, stepping forward. The floor squelched beneath his feet, as if the marble had softened. "I tried to contain it. We did not know it would wake." Leonora's eyes narrowed. "What are you now?" Rasper opened his robes. Inside was not flesh, it was absence. A cavern where a heart should be. And within that void, a scroll, flaming at its edges, yet never consumed. Its text flickered like a dream half-remembered. "The last of the old faith," he said. "The remnant that remembers." San Saba stared. The urge to destroy battled the pull to kneel. "You must bring it to the throne," Raspari said. "You must complete the rite. What happens if I do? The world is rewritten. And if I don't, it is erased." They crossed the city by night, not because it was safer, but because the stars had changed. They no longer aligned with known constellations. They pulsed in patterns that whispered things when stared at too long. They guided, somehow. Constellations bent into the shape of a spiral eye. Leonora read from the Book of Ash, her voice calm. Her eyes glowed like coals, the sclera etched with tiny glyphs. Emilio, pale and silent, carried the bones of brother Tommaso wrapped in cloth. He refused to let go. They passed the Colosseum, no longer a ruin, but a ribcage of gods. The arches moaned. The Pantheon hovered 3 feet above its foundations, spinning slowly on an unseen axis, its oculus pouring down liquid light. Children born that day came out speaking in lost tongues. One whispered, "I remember Babylon." Still they walked toward the mausoleum of Augustus. It had once crumbled, choked in weeds and time. Now it was reborn. Polished obsidian walls rose in precise arcs. Glowing sigils orbited its peak like moons. The ground around it throbbed with sacred gravity. The throne waited within. Inside, sound vanished. No footsteps, no breath, no heartbeat. Only presence. A silence so thick it felt like drowning. The walls bled faint light. Each step forward dissolved part of their humanity. The spiral staircase descended into the earth, carved from bone and veined salt. It pulsed beneath their feet like a living thing. They descended, and were changed. Emilio lost his name. It fell from his lips like ash. Leonora remembered her true name in every life she'd lived before. Sabah felt the scroll within Raspar ignite inside him. He became its echo. At the base, the temple beneath, older than Rome, older than speech. Obsidian columns held up a ceiling of stars. The air reeked of myrrh, blood, and ink. At the center sat the throne, made not of gold, but of skin, language, and remembrance. And upon it, him. Not Marius, not the bishop, but the one beneath names. He rose slowly, robes of flayed parchment crackling. A crown of burning glyphs hovered over his head. His eyes were voids, deeper than death. "You come to finish what was broken," he said, "to unwrite the lie." "Yes," Sabah whispered. He stepped forward, placed his hand upon the throne. His skin unspooled into glyphs, which crawled into the throne like roots returning to soil. The spiral turned. Reality fractured. Now they were everywhere. In every monastery, every ossuary, every whispered prayer. The Ashen walked not to destroy, but to remind, to write the truth again upon the world. And at the center of it all, sat Sabah, no longer a man, no longer bishop, but memory made flesh. The throne remembered, and through him, so did the world. The sky above Rome was no longer sky. It had become a veil, thin as parchment, stretched tight over something vast and writhing. Black veins traced patterns across the firmament, twitching subtly, forming glyphs that lasted only moments before dissolving into unreadable clouds. Where sunlight had once bathed stone and skin, now shone an amber haze, as though the world had been permanently plunged into the last hour before twilight. San Saba stood at the apex of the mausoleum's uppermost spire, alone. Below him, the city remembered too much. Memories bled from brick and blood, pooled in fountains, whispered in the mouths of statues that wept sand instead of water. He could hear the city breathing, no longer a metaphor but truth. The stones inhaled and exhaled, the cobbled streets moaned, and still Rome lived, but not as before. He stared toward the Vatican, the dome of Saint. Peter's had cracked open like an egg, revealing not ruin, but a great orb of flame suspended in black roots. The Sistine ceiling was no longer paint, but flesh. Michelangelo's God still reached out, but now to himself, infinite and screaming. The rite was not yet complete. A presence stirred behind him. He did not turn. Leonora. She had changed more than any of them. Her robes were ink now, liquid script that coiled about her limbs. Her voice echoed even when she spoke softly, a consequence of holding the book too long. "They're tearing themselves apart," she said. "All across the city, the new memory is fighting the old." Sabah nodded slowly. "It must, before it can settle. Emilio, he's gone." The bishop closed his eyes. "What do you mean?" He walked into the mirror at the temple's gate, the one that showed Babylon. He whispered a word I didn't know, and he was simply absorbed. Silence pressed between them. "We knew the price," Sabah said, "even if we didn't speak it aloud. Knowing doesn't make it easier." She moved beside him, and together they watched the remnants of Rome flicker in and out of focus. Below, the Ashen moved with strange urgency. Some carved runes into the very air, etching light itself. Others lay down and became stone. Some took flight, not with wings, but by unraveling into crows. "It's the language," Leonora whispered. "It's waking something deeper." Sabah turned toward her now. "What do you mean?" She held up her hand. Her fingers bore words, not tattoos but actual script, embedded in flesh, writhing and shifting with emotion. "It's not just memory anymore. It's rewriting us, our bones, our names. Then we must go deeper." Leonora's face went pale. "You mean the library?" Sabah nodded. "The first tongue lies there. If we are to guide this rewriting, we must understand the pen." They traveled by way of the Necropoli Vaticana, the underground city of the dead. There, beneath the tombs of popes and saints, a stairwell had appeared where no stairwell had been before. It led down and down, past ossuaries that whispered, past vaults where saints opened their mouths in silent screams, past the tomb of Peter, whose body now glowed faintly, lips parted as if trying to speak some final blessing. The stairwell ended in ink, not metaphor, actual ink. An ocean of it, black, endless and undulating. Floating upon it, a single boat, carved from bone and bound with golden thread. They stepped aboard. No oars, no sail. The ink carried them. The further they drifted, the less they remembered. Not memories of Rome, but of themselves. Names blurred, time thinned. Son Saba recalled his mother's voice, but not her face. Leonora cried softly as her father's stories dissolved into meaningless syllables, and still they drifted. Hours? Days? Time had no purchase here. Then at last, a shore of parchment. Miles of it, written upon with blood, ash, tears. The library, it rose like a forest, towers of books, scrolls, and codices. The sky above was a dome of stretched vellum, etched with constellations made of ink blots. No flames burned here. The light came from the words themselves, each phrase radiating a pale, cold glow. An ancient scribe waited at the gate. He had no face, only a mask of letters constantly rewriting. His hands were quills, his spine stacked books. "You come seeking the first tongue," he said, "but it does not come freely." "We are ready," said Saba. "No," said the scribe. "You are not, but you are needed." He stepped aside. They entered. The library was not built, it was grown. Each corridor was a tunnel of text. Each door, a chapter. Every whisper they made was captured and shelved. Memory bled into the walls. Ghosts of past scholars drifted through the aisles, mouthing unreadable psalms. A scream echoed, not one of fear, but of understanding. Somewhere deep within, someone had read a word they should not have read. The deeper they walked, the older the texts became. Cuneiform gave way to pictographs, symbols gave way to geometries, and finally, something deeper, not writing, but intention, carved not into matter, but reality. They stood before it. The first page, it hovered, not in air, but in meaning, unwritten, awaiting the pen. Leonora fell to her knees. Her eyes bled ink, her voice shook. "I see it. I see the pattern, the shape of all names." Saba reached out and touched it. Pain lanced through his soul, not his body, but the thing beneath it. He remembered every lie he had ever spoken, and saw how each one had bent the world around it. He saw the words he had not said, and the deaths they had allowed. He screamed, and when he woke, he held the pen. The quill of becoming, made not of feather, but of memory. He turned to Leonora. "Are you ready?" "No," she said, "but I will come." They returned to the surface. Rome was gone. Not destroyed, rewritten. A spiral city of light and echo. Streets rearranged into verses. Rivers that flowed backward, carrying ash to the past. The people spoke in mirrored sentences. Names had become verbs. Churches floated above the ground, anchored by prayer. And in the center, the throne, empty, waiting. Saba stepped forward. He placed the quill against his chest and wrote, not in blood, but in self. He wrote his name away. He wrote his guilt into song. He wrote the world, and this time he wrote it right. Rome, reborn, pulsed in rhythm with an unknown verse. The air was filled with a music not heard but felt, like breath held in chorus, like the tension before a storm. No longer a city of ruins, Rome now resembled an illuminated manuscript brought to life. Streets wound into syllables, palaces unfolded like pages, and beneath the surface of every stone, whispers curled and echoed. A chorus of the reimagined past hummed in the veins of its people. At the center of it all, the throne remained empty, its form more idea than object now, made of light braided with memory. Yet even the rewritten world had shadows, and from these crept the consequences. Saba, or what remained of him, awoke in the hall of the broken font. His body lay beneath mosaics that shifted with every breath he took. No longer fully flesh, he found himself suspended between scripture and sensation. The quill of becoming hovered by his side, inkless now, its tip still wet with self. Leonora sat beside him, her eyes haunted. She had not spoken since they emerged from the library. She wore silence like mourning. Her fingers fidgeted with a lock of parchment she had plucked from the wind. "It begins," she said finally. "What begins?" "The resistance." Saba rose slowly. From whom? From those who remember too much, and from those who remember nothing at all. They walked through the market of lost voices, where merchants sold echoes of forgotten prayers in jars filled with ancestral guilt. All around them, the rewritten city shimmered with contradiction. Children played in streets shaped like music. Old men bowed before fountains that wept memories instead of water. Each echo had a shadow, each laughter, an undertone of weeping. But something had changed. The language was faltering. Words flickered like dying candlelight. Statues began to stammer. Banners fluttered with script that rewrote itself midair, contradicting its own declarations. The rewriting is incomplete, Saba whispered. Leonora nodded. The world is asking questions, and it wants answers in the old tongue. A woman approached them, cloaked in ash. Her eyes burned hollow. She fell to her knees. You carry the pen, she gasped. You are the scribe, the one who rewrote the lie. Saba bent to help her, but she recoiled, clutching a scroll to her chest. This is the rebuttal, she hissed. The city is writing back. Leonora's face paled. It has become self-aware. No, Saba whispered. Worse. It remembers what we buried. In the underground archives beneath the basilica turned parable, a resistance had formed, not of soldiers but scribes. They called themselves the palimpsest. Bound in silence, they bore the language of the world's first draft, the version before guilt, before betrayal, before even Rome. The archives were labyrinthine. Their walls shifted like living grammar, archways folding into clauses and staircases curling like questions without answers. Light glowed from liquid ink flowing along the floor, illuminating fragments of forgotten prophecy. At their head stood a familiar figure, Emilio, but changed. He no longer bore flesh, but was composed entirely of letters, his body a shifting column of script. Each movement rearranged his form, each word spoke him into being. When he moved, the air trembled with unspoken thoughts. You left the mirror, Saba said. No, Emilio replied, voice like turning pages. I became it. What are you doing? Correcting you. The world you wrote is false. You gave Rome poetry when it needed truth. You gave it grace when it demanded justice. You want to undo it all? I want to remember it all. Leonora stepped forward. You will shatter it. So be it, Emilio said. A broken truth is better than a perfect lie. A storm gathered above Rome, not clouds but questions. They spiraled through the sky in great arcs of flame script, seeking contradiction. Where they found it, they struck. Towers of memory exploded in verse. Cathedrals unraveled into raw history. The air grew dense with the weight of things unsaid. Ink rained from the heavens, blackening robes, smudging truth. The streets flooded with stories trying to rewrite themselves. People clutched their chests, mouthing sentences that no longer belonged to them. Identity fractured across paragraphs. Saba and Leonora ascended the Tower of First Speech, the highest point in the rewritten city. Below them, a battle of language raged, palimpsest versus pen. Symbols collided midair, meaning buckled under the weight of revision. Scrolls burned into ash and were reborn in newer dialects. Ancient altars spoke in riddles. The air itself pulsed with syllables caught between tenses. We have to end it, Leonora said, with the final sentence. There's no such thing, Saba replied. There is now. Write it. He lifted the quill once more, but this time his hand trembled. What do I write? Leonora placed her hand over his. Right choice. In the moment that followed, all things paused, the rewritten and the original, the echo and the utterance, the guilt and the grace, and into that silence he wrote a single line. Let all tongues be heard, and let none be silenced. The world convulsed. Not in destruction, but in plurality. From the ruins rose a city neither old nor new, neither poem nor confession. Rome became a dialogue, a place of layers, where every memory had voice, where every scar could speak, where forgiveness and fury lived as neighbors, and history was not a single road but a marketplace of paths. And as the storm passed, the people gathered before the throne, still empty, not out of loss, but because it now belonged to all of them.